Labour, from the top down, has embraced just about every neo-Marxist folly in recent years. From taking a knee for BLM, remember that? To pushing the most extreme forms of trans activism. But now, Keir Starmer has suddenly discovered a shocking new fact. Men have a penis and women have a vagina.
I mean, it's also quite alarming just for any man to get into his 60s and discover that men have penises and women don't. It makes you wonder what he's done with his life. But no, of course, this is all just this. I mean, it's so pathetic watching him wriggle like that. He failed to stand up for his very brave female MP, Rosie Duffield, when she simply stated biological fact. He spent a long time doing exactly what we saw him do in one of those interviews, which is, well, it might be true, but we shouldn't say it, as if facts are sort of offensive and
quite the departure from what he's been saying in the recent past. In fact, he's performing quite a few backflips on this issue. Let's take a look. A woman can have a penis. I don't think we can conduct this debate. Trans rights are human rights, and I support the right to self-identification. We are committed to updating the Gender Recognition Act to introduce self-declaration for trans people. We don't think self-identification is the right way forward. Is it transphobic to say that only women have a cervix? Well, it's something that shouldn't be said. It's not right. But is it right or wrong for Rosie Duffield to say that only women have a cervix? Well, look, biologically, she is of course right. It's extraordinary, isn't it? A man in his 60s who suddenly discovers the very basics of human biology. What exactly has he been doing with his life? But this isn't just about biology. It's about principles. Starmer failed to stand up for his brave MP, Rosie Duffield, when she simply stated a biological fact. Instead, he danced around the issue, twisting himself into knots.
So you've previously agreed that it's transphobic to say that only women have a cervix. What constitutes being a woman to you?
Thank you for this question, because it is always a sensitive issue. Let me start by saying the blindingly obvious. For 99.9 something% of women, it's all biological and it's very straightforward, and the Labour Party has fought for women's rights for a very, very long time, for equality of pay, equality of recognition, etc. And we will fight for women's rights going into the future. So that's, in a sense, very straightforward. But as you will all know, there are a small number of people who do not identify with the gender that they were born into, and it can be incredibly stressful. And there are young people who are going through real anguish, actually, in relation to this. And I'm not going to join those that just want to add to the abuse of that small group of people. I actually think this is much less about, which toilet do you use, etc., etc. Most people would say the thing I want most is to have access to health care, health treatment, health advice, which at the moment is not available because we haven't funded the NHS properly. And I know people who've been waiting a very, very long time just to get any health advice on this at all. So for the vast majority of people, it's biological. That's very, very straightforward. But I'm not going to just dismiss or ignore or pretend that a small group of people who don't identify with the gender they're born into don't exist in some way, or disparage them in some way.
Because this isn't just about this issue. It's about his entire approach to politics. A man who is so easily swayed by cultural trends, who shifts with the winds of public opinion, will continue to do so. If he can change his mind on this within just a few years, what else will he change once he's in power? And it's not just Starmer. It's a pattern we see throughout modern politics. Politicians who lack conviction, who rely entirely on focus groups and social media trends to determine their positions. They don't lead, they follow, they chase approval, rather than standing firm on principles. And with Labour, one thing is always predictable: their contempt for the West for their own history, and sometimes even for their own people.
And always this dance, it reminds me of the sort of the religious wars of the 14 and 1500s, when people were sort of forced to say things or forced to denounce things, even if they believed them. And it's like that. Why doesn't this man, if he wants to be a leader, why doesn't he just have the courage to say what everyone knows is true and say, of course, it doesn't mean we need to be unpleasant or mean or anything like that to anyone who believes that they're born in the wrong body. But that doesn't mean that facts aren't facts. It's perfectly straightforward, and it's very telling about him, because, as I've written before, the problem with it isn't this issue itself only. It's that anyone who's going to be blown by a cultural wind that way, which wasn't the case merely 7 or 8 years ago, the next cultural wind will blow them again and again and again. And who knows which winds will blow in the next 5 or 10 years whilst Keir Starmer is Prime Minister. But yeah, I mean, this is, I mean, you mentioned earlier, Rita, that would they listen to focus groups? Would that the politicians did listen to focus groups? They don't. They listen to a few deranged harridans on their own side most of the time, screaming banshees from the culture wars online. The real public, the normal public, want to have nothing to do with that nonsense. You know, the normal public believe, quite rightly, in Britain like elsewhere, that, you know, if your national team is playing, you know, that's the team you support, and your national flag, you know, might be a flag you're able to fly and even be proud of. But as you say, Rita, we live in a strange era in the West where you can be proud of everything apart from what is yours. Any other flag, Jess Phillips, who's another example of us just sort of swayed by the wind. Every gust that blows takes Jess Phillips with it. She likes to present herself as this, you know, working class, straight talking woman. She isn't. She's an absolutely typical automaton of the era who says whatever she thinks she has to say to get avoiding the banshees that are howling. And yes, I mean, there's this sort of snobbery about this, and there's nothing wrong with being proud of your national flag. But as you know, it's only in the West that we beat ourselves up like this and tolerate politicians who scorn the public for being proud of their country.
Douglas, tell me why you believe anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
I say it's obvious that in all of history, anti-Semitism has been a shape-shifting virus. Sometimes people hated the Jews for their race. Sometimes they hated them for their religion. In this era, the only permissible way to hate the Jews is to hate them for having a state. And as I mentioned in the debate, this absolute obsession with the single Jewish state in the world, this way in which people who never turned out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad was killing 6 times the number of people who've died in every war involving Israel since 1948, when the Arab armies advanced. If you didn't come out on the streets when Bashar al-Assad killed 6 times that number of people in a decade, but you did turn out to attack Israel after October the 7th, you're an anti-Semite. And there are many, many other examples of this. I gave examples in Canada, in the city I was in, Toronto, synagogues firebombed, Jewish schools shot at, a Muslim mob going through a Jewish area screaming about these Zionist rats and pigs. And this is just anti-Semitism. And it's the only form of it. And as I said, this doesn't mean that everyone who is anti-Zionist knows they're an anti-Semite. Plenty of them are just incredibly ignorant and drinking from wells they don't understand.